It is 8 straight series clinching losses for the Toronto Maple Leafs, which means there are a lot of questions for Kyle Dubas and co. as they head into the offseason. Gentlemen, where do I begin? I'll start with the basic generic question.
Yeah. Where
do the Leafs go from here? If you're Kyle Dubas, what is the number one task for you this summer?
Well, I mean, and last year, I mean, you had the job. I mean, I think they have to sit down and look at their salary cap and try to plot out the big picture moving forward.
After they look at it,
well, yeah, there'll be some tears.
Is that bad?
Then get back to it.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to what we said years ago, Jackie, is that I felt that this all started for Toronto, some of the challenges cap-wise with the signing of John Tavares several years back. And listen, John is a great player. And he's, listen, every team would love to have John Tavares. But the Toronto Maple Leafs had Matthews, they had Marner, they had Nylander. They were loaded up front with young players who eventually were going to need contracts. So, twofold for me, Lots. I don't think they really needed a player of Tavares' ilk. And with what they paid him, I think it was 7 times 11 over 7 years, a lot of money. And then not only did I think that they now had overspent at the forward position, and knowing that these other guys are going to need these deals they eventually got, is they sent a message to those young players, Lots, like, hey, there's no discounts, I guess, because like if I'm Austin Matthews or Mitch Marner or William Nylander, I'm saying, why would I give you a discount when you brought somebody in from the outside and paid him $11 million? So in the end, they set themselves up to have to deal with these guys at a much higher level in early contracts than maybe they might have. So I think for a number of reasons, that started the cap problem, because they've spent a lot at the forward position, and now they're scrambling for defense and going forward for goaltending.
Yeah, it was just, for me, it's miscalculation on what you can spend. If you're going to, when you know who the players are, you can kind of figure out where the money's going to go, even if you're not there yet. To be fair, the salary cap, obviously, with the pandemic has slowed.
Couldn't foresee that.
Nobody could foresee that. Yeah. So that deserves to be said. But still, overall, what we're finding out this year, as we see all these wonderful tweets on a minute-to-minute basis, 16 of the top 17 highest-paid players in the National Hockey League are no longer playing.
Yeah. They're out.
What does that mean? They're out. They're out of the playoffs. What does that mean? Carey Price is the only one that isn't at $10.5 million.
And then we would have been hard-pressed to think that would be the case either, right?
Right.
So
exactly. So at the end of the day, it's the construction of the teams that is getting teams through. Yeah. It's not just having 4 or 5 great players. I could look at the New York Rangers and say right now they're set up kind of like an all-star team. Their next transition, and I believe some of the changes they just made are because they want people that are going to come in and they're going to look at their team and figure out, how do we build this roster into a winning team? Not just a bunch of superstar players, because they've got superstars.
Yeah, they got some, and they got some.
They got some, and they got some others that look like they could be there. Yeah. But now that's going to be the challenge. Well, Toronto is in that same cycle, in my opinion. Now, how do we take these superstar players and build it into a team? And ultimately, I mean, I will be shocked if you don't see one of those players from that board traded.
Well, that's my question. That's the question that's being asked in Toronto right now. Mitch Marner has no playoff goals in his last 18 playoff games. You've got a handful of players taking up the majority of your cap. Do the Toronto Maple Leafs need to trade one of their big-name players? Do you buy into that? And if so, who is it?
Well, it's probably easier to start off with who you can't or who it isn't. So we'll start off with who it isn't. The guy on the left, right there.
Can't be Austin Matthews.
It's not Austin Matthews. You're not trading him. He's still got some development to go in terms of figuring out how to play well in the playoffs. But even that, I don't feel 100% confident. I mean, this guy burst onto the scene against, I think it was Washington his first year. He was throwing goals in left and right. He can score in the playoffs. This was an unusual year, in my opinion. The depth wasn't quite there for Toronto. So I don't believe it's him. I don't believe you could trade John Tavares right now. I really don't.
I don't either.
And not because he's a bad player or anything, just because the contract
age,
is onerous,
term, dollars.
Exactly. This is just as clear as we can call it. Mitch Marner, I don't believe they'll want to trade. Although I have to tell you, it would be more challenging than you think with that cap hit. 10-9 for a winger that hasn't scored in how many games, Jackie?
18 playoff games.
18 playoff games. That rolls off your tongue just a little too easy.
I've heard it a few times in the last
yes, you have.
hours.
So I just said they're going to trade somebody. Who's it going to be? Most likely it's William Nylander.
But he's been their best. He's the one one guy that can perform in the playoffs based on what we've seen.
I understand, but
and he's the cheapest.
That's
well,
right.
But his contract, another thing too, Lots, that's going to be interesting is the contracts of Matthews and Nylander, I believe, run out in the same year. And Matthews signed a 5-year deal, which was kind of telling because, they didn't name him captain. He didn't even have a letter when they first went through that process. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. And when you sign a 5-year deal, you're saying, I'm going to have a chance to get to the market sooner than later. So we'll have to see how that plays out over time. But we'll talk about what I talked about with you guys off the air. Because, when you think about moving somebody, right, I think Marner is the guy that probably you'd like to move only because it's so much money, right? He's a really good player. Don't get me wrong. He's a really good player. But if you move out 10.6, 10.9, whatever it is, that's a lot of money.
10.9 million.
So it's going to be hard.
We don't care about the cash, just the AV.
Really hard to do that, right? But we just talked about yesterday, there's a fella in Columbus who's a big, long, lanky defenseman.
He's older.
That is got 1 year left on his current contract. He's only a couple of years older than Marner.
Yep.
That wants to test the market. So maybe if the Toronto Maple Leafs are willing to part with Marner, they could make a deal with the Seth Jones people. Now, that would be contingent, Lots, as you know, on Seth Jones being willing to sign an extension.
He's got a year left.
And I think
you wouldn't make that trade without knowing.
Of course, you'd have to have that in your pocket.
So you say, I want to talk to him.
Exactly. And Columbus,
I'm not making a trade.
Yeah,
but I will make the trade, but I need to talk to Seth Jones.
Exactly, and talk to Pat Brisson, his agent, and that whole process. Yeah. And for Columbus, they're in a tough spot, right? They've got to trade Seth Jones. It appears he's going to test the market. You could get nothing for him. If they could get a player of the ilk of Mitch Marner, who's a 24-year-old kid who still has a lot of upside to his game. Now, he's making a lot of money, but Columbus can afford it because they'll let all these guys leave, right? And there's no protections for Mitch at this point where Toronto can't move him. So his only option would be to stick his skates in the ice and say, I'm not going there. But I don't know how much that helps him.
Yeah.
Because really there's no recourse for him. So I think at the end of the day, that's one possibility. And just something as you think about these possibilities, Toronto to add a guy like Seth Jones all of a sudden makes their blue line a lot better. And I think that's an area they need to improve. But even with that, you'd sign him, he'd probably be about a $9 million player. You save a little money based on what Marner's making, but you still got to figure out how to build out the back of your group and your goaltending. So there's some challenges ahead, no matter how you do it in this fantasy land suggestion that I've put forward here. But even if you do that, you still have challenges because of the flat cap.
That would go a long way to building out their back end, though.
Yes, it would.
Because Seth Jones is capable of playing anywhere from 25 minutes on the low end to 28, 29.
Yeah. And now you'd have Riley with him.
You got him and Riley.
But Riley's contract is coming to an end soon, too, so that's a consideration. And
yes.
Yeah.
You almost kind of need – it doesn't really happen in the NHL. I think it's a good thing, but it doesn't happen in the NHL the way it does in the NBA.
Yeah.
You get 3 or 4 guys together, and they say, let's go to Miami.
Yeah.
And they go down to Miami and win some.
But you can do it in basketball because the way the game is played is so different. There's only 5 guys on the court at the same time. They play for long stretches of the game. It's completely different. In the NHL, you have a much deeper bench. You have a 20-man roster at the game time. And everybody, you look at these advanced stats. I think it's hilarious. Offensive zone time, right? The best players who are making all this money, they only have the puck in the offensive zone for a handful of minutes, really, at most. Those are the really good ones.
You think about time on ice, your best player, if they're playing 25 minutes, they're not even playing half the game.
That's correct.
That's why the rest of your lineup, your
so
third
important.
line, your fourth line, your defense, those things are so important in a 7-game series. In the regular season, Austin Matthews playing 25 minutes a night with Marner and Tavares on the second line, they can win it for you in the regular season, but it's different over a 7-game series where coaches are dialed in, players are elevating their game. It's a different beast.
And I'll just give you one other thing too, because we're talking about teams and winning. The Colorado Avalanche are in a great spot, not only because they have great players. Nathan MacKinnon is making what, $6 million a year, $6.5 million a year. I mean, really, on the open market, Nathan McKinnon is probably maybe a shade under McDavid, right? So that allows for the Avalanche.
He's the best player right now.
Yeah, that allows for the Avalanche to do a lot of things. That window will eventually close. That contract will expire. Then they'll have to figure out something new in regards to him. At that point, maybe the cap has gone up and we've kind of come out of this. But there's so many things in a cap world. And Lodge, you know it as well as anybody because you've been an agent, you've been a general manager. You know how it works in a cap world. And for Kyle Dubas and these guys, they've got a lot of things to consider.
We already know the cap is going up.
Yeah.
We know that because of the new television deals.
Yeah.
And you can project that in.
Yeah.
And
But how
I do
much
models for this stuff all the time. So it's been known for 4 years.
Yeah.
We just haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
And this pandemic has definitely
changed the dynamic.
A wrench into a lot of people's plans.
Yep.
Well, for what it's worth, Gabe Landeskog, UFA after this year, Cale Makar, RFA after this year.
Yeah.
So they'll have their own questions to answer.
They will.
Come in.
For now.
The salary cap forces you into that, Jackie.
Yep.
That's just a repercussion of having a great team.
Yep.
All right, one more for you. Sheldon Keefe is Kyle Dubas's guy. If Kyle Dubas hangs around as part of the Shanna plan or whatever it was called all those years ago, how much of the blame does Sheldon Keefe shoulder for what's gone on through 7 games against the Montreal Canadiens?
I thought he just, I thought he got out-coached over the last 3 games, quite frankly. I thought the Montreal Canadiens and their group made adjustments, and the Toronto Maple Leafs didn't adjust to them. Now, they did have a big problem. They lost a really good second center, 1B center in Tavares, so that limits their options a little bit offensively, allows for Montreal to drill down on those top guys. They lost Jake Muzzin at the end, so that hurts you a little bit defensively. But in the end, and Jackie, you said it, he was a little stubborn. He didn't make changes I thought he should have tried to make, and that is, again, as I said earlier, it's a learning experience. So for me, I think there's a lot on Sheldon Keefe over these last couple of games. He could have been better.
Couldn't agree with you more. Those are conversations that are generally private. I don't know if I'd use the word blame. I just think he could have made adjustments. He could have could have been less stubborn, as you're pointing out. He could have been more proactive, quite frankly, to try and...
That's probably a better word.
The whole trick today is to put these guys in positions to succeed, and that doesn't mean just play the wheels off of them. That's basically what they did with Marner and Matthews. They played the wheels off of these kids to the point where broadcasters were talking about, well, you got to figure out how to really conserve your energy out there if you're Austin Matthews, because you just don't look like you have anything when you get it. Well, that is no way to ride in the NHL. This is a 110% effort game every single shift. And even if you're a superstar, if you can't summon that when you need it, you're not a superstar anymore. You may still be, but not in that moment, not when they need you the most. So, I felt like they lost a little bit of accountability in their group through this playoffs. And that's a conversation for the GM and for the coach to have, and probably a guy like Brendan Shanahan, who knows this well, having been involved with teams that had this type of ilk.